I was halfway through hammering the last beam into place when I heard the tires screech. I knew that sound. That was the HOA president's minivan probably doing 40 in a 25 again, pulling into my gravel driveway like she owned the place. "Excuse me," came the voice, sharp as a steak knife and twice as annoying. "What do you think you're doing?" I turned around, wiping the sweat off my brow with the back of my hand. "Good morning to you too, Cheryl." Cheryl Oakley stood there in her usual khaki capris, HOA binder clutched like it was the Constitution, and that tight-faced scowl she reserved just for things that made her blood pressure spike like freedom and personal property rights. "You can't just build a barn in this neighborhood," she snapped. "It violates HOA Code Section 7, Paragraph 4. Outbuildings must be approved by the board." I pointed to the sign I had nailed to the post by the driveway that said "Private Property Established 1889. This ain't your neighborhood, Cheryl, not legally anyway." She scoffed like I had just told her the moon was made of cheese. "This land is inside the Heritage Woods subdivision. You fall under the association's jurisdiction." I leaned against one of the barn posts and crossed my arms. "No, I don't. My property line wraps around the entire southern leg of your cookie-cutter suburb." "This land's been in my family since Grover Cleveland was president," she blinked. "Who?" "Never mind," I said. "Look, I've got the original deed from 1889, filed with the county. My land was annexed into the township 70 years before your HOA even existed." "You can't fine me for building something on my own land." Cheryl's nostrils flared. She flipped open her binder like she was about to summon the HOA demons. "I don't care what paperwork you think you have, you'll be hearing from us. This structure is unapproved, unsightly, and frankly an eyesore." I glanced at the red barn. Fresh paint, solid timber, classic gable roof. It looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. "Funny," I said. "My great-grandfather built one just like it right here." "Only thing unsightly is your attitude." She jabbed a finger at me. "You're going to regret this, Mr. Rourke." I watched her stomp back to her van, nearly knocking over a chicken that had wandered too close to her heels. I looked down at it. "Welcome to the show, Cluckles," I muttered. "This is gonna be a fun one." Sure enough, 3 days later, I got a letter in the mail. Certified, of course. The HOA had fined me $5,000 for unauthorized construction and failure to submit architectural plans. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. Then I walked to the old lockbox in my study, pulled out the deed, the original, yellowed, and notarized with the county seal, and headed into town. If Cheryl wanted a war, she just picked a fight with the wrong guy. I stepped into the county recorder's office just before noon, holding the original deed in its protective case. The place smelled like old paper and lemon polish, and the receptionist behind the desk looked up with that blend of boredom and suspicion only small-town government workers can master. "Afternoon," I said, sliding the document onto the counter. "I need to pull the property boundary file for Lot 7, Township 3, Range 14. Also need a certified copy of this deed added to the current record." She raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. Good, I wasn't in the mood for small talk. While she disappeared into the back room, I stared at the county map on the wall, every lot, every parcel. My land sat outside the red border that marked the HOA's jurisdiction. It always had. 10 minutes later, she returned with a manila envelope. "Here's the certified copy." "And we pulled the township development overlay." She tapped the map. "You're here. HOA runs from here to here." She drew a line with her finger, stopping well short of my acreage. I thanked her, tucked the documents under my arm, and headed straight to the township zoning office 2 blocks over. The guy in charge there, Dale Whitman, had a reputation for being firm but fair. I found him hunched over a desk, glasses halfway down his nose, reviewing stormwater assessments. "Dale," I said, placing the envelope on his desk. "I need you to confirm in writing that my land is not subject to any HOA regulations. Cheryl Oakley and her crew are trying to fine me $5,000 for putting up a barn." He looked over the paperwork, flipping through the deed with interest. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. This thing predates the township charter by almost 50 years. Your property's grandfathered in. You're not beholden to any HOA covenants unless you sign them, and I don't see any annexation paperwork." "I didn't sign a damn thing," I said. He nodded. "Then they've got no legal standing." "I'll draft you a letter with the township seal stating as much. Appreciate it." I left with that letter in hand, scanned it the second I got home, and emailed it to the HOA's general inbox. No subject line, no message, just the PDF. Let them chew on that. The response came faster than I expected. That evening, Cheryl and 2 board members showed up at the edge of my property, just outside the cattle fence. They didn't step foot on my land, but they paced, whispering to each other like teenagers who'd just been caught egging a house. I walked out with a lantern and set it on the fence post. "Evening," I said calmly. Cheryl folded her arms. "Your tone in that email was completely inappropriate." "I didn't use a tone." "I sent you a legal document." One of the board members, a wiry guy with a Bluetooth headset still in his ear, cleared his throat. "We were under the impression that your property was within the subdivision boundaries. You were wrong." He shifted uncomfortably. "We've already allocated funds from the community budget to pursue enforcement. You used HOA dues to try and enforce rules on land you don't even control," Cheryl bristled. "Don't twist it. We acted in good faith." I held my phone up. "You mind repeating that?" She stepped back. "Turn that off. It's a public conversation. You're standing outside my fence. I'm within my rights." The Bluetooth guy muttered something about needing to review bylaws and turned to leave. Cheryl lingered, eyes narrowing. "I hope you realize you're isolating yourself from the community." I shrugged. "Funny, I never asked to be part of it." They left in silence. I went back to the barn, checked the roofline one more time, and climbed the ladder to finish the last shingle. I figured that was the end of it. I figured wrong. 3 days later, I woke up to find a bright orange notice stapled to my gate. It wasn't from the HOA this time, it was from the county. A stop work order citing unauthorized structural development impacting watershed flow. They'd filed a complaint with the Department of Environmental Services. I stood there in disbelief, reading the notice twice. Then I made some calls. By noon, I was sitting across from an engineer named Carla at the county's environmental office, showing her drone footage I'd taken during the first week of construction. "There's no runoff entering any streams," she confirmed, flipping through the site survey. "And you're more than 200 feet from the nearest wetland. This complaint doesn't even make sense. Can you put that in writing?" "Already did." She printed the dismissal letter, signed it, and handed it to me. "Between you and me, we get a lot of these. Usually from HOAs trying to flex muscle they don't have." I went home, posted the letter on the community message board at the gas station bulletin, and stuck a copy on the same fence post where Cheryl had glared at me. And that's when things got real nasty. Later that week, my mailbox was ripped clean off its post. Not knocked over, ripped out and gone. The screws had been sheared clean. I filed a police report and replaced it with a locking steel box set in concrete. 2 nights after that, someone dumped a bag of nails in my driveway. That was the line. I installed motion-activated trail cams hidden in the trees, not the cheap kind, the good ones. Infrared, high-resolution, silent shutter. By the end of the week, I had footage. Full-color video of Cheryl's husband, Randy, walking up my drive at 2 in the morning, spreading roofing nails from a 5-gallon bucket. I handed the footage to Deputy Hill at the sheriff's office. He whistled low. "Dumb move," he muttered. "That's criminal mischief and trespassing. Think you can do something with it?" "Oh, I'm more than happy to knock on a few doors." 2 days later, I watched from my porch as a sheriff's cruiser pulled into the Oakley's driveway. Randy came out in a bathrobe, tried to wave it off, but Hill wasn't having it. 20 minutes later, he left with a citation and a warning. I didn't hear from them for a while after that, until the audit. Turns out someone, I have a guess, who filed a complaint with the IRS claiming I was running an unlicensed agricultural business from my property. probably hoping to hit me with fines or force me to shut down, but that tactic backfired. See, I was registered. I'd filed the paperwork a year ago when I started raising heritage chickens and selling eggs at the farmer's market. I had a Schedule F on my taxes and everything. When the IRS agent came out to inspect, he ended up buying 24 eggs and asking if I ever considered selling to local restaurants. By then, the neighborhood had started to catch on. Folks who'd once nodded politely at HOA meetings were now stopping by my place for eggs, fresh tomatoes, and conversation. I shared the footage of Randy. I showed them the bogus environmental complaint. And I told them what Cheryl and her board were trying to pull using community funds to target a private citizen. That's when Marlene Peters, a retired paralegal who lived 2 streets over, got involved. She petitioned for a full audit of the HOA's finances, citing misuse of funds and lack of transparency. She got 43 signatures in 2 days. The board tried to stonewall her. They claimed the budget disclosures were private, but Marlene knew better. She filed a request under the state's Common Interest Ownership Act, which legally compelled them to release the records. What we found was worse than we imagined. Tens of thousands spent on legal consultations with no billing detail. A landscaping contract awarded to Cheryl's cousin's company twice the going rate. HOA dues used to pay for a new security system that only covered Cheryl's street. The board had been bleeding the community dry. By the end of the month, the residents called for a vote of no confidence. 5 of the 7 board members were removed, including Cheryl. Marlene was elected interim president. The first thing she did, issue a public apology. The second, implement a policy requiring a 2/3 community vote before any fines over $500 could be issued. As for me, I finished the barn, painted the front with a mural of a rooster breaking through an HOA sign, and added a new hand-carved wooden plaque above the door. Rourke Agricultural Co-op, established 1889. HOA free since forever. By early spring, the barn was fully functional, stocked with feed, tools, and a growing flock of hens that were laying enough eggs to keep half the county in omelets. The mural on the front had become a bit of a local attraction. Teenagers posed with it for photos, and even the mayor dropped by one afternoon, chuckling as he pointed out the cracked HOA sign beneath the triumphant rooster. But underneath the surface, something still didn't sit right with me. Cheryl might have lost her position, but she hadn't left the neighborhood. Her house, 3 cul-de-sacs over, was still the same eyesore with plastic flamingos and a fake wishing well that leaned like it wanted to fall over and end it all. And while she'd gone quiet publicly, I noticed a few odd changes happening around the subdivision. For one, the new HOA board kept delaying the financial audit Marlene had initiated. First, it was a software issue. Then the accountant they hired quit unexpectedly. Then they claimed the previous treasurer had taken the records home and couldn't be reached. That didn't make sense. Marlene had personally handed over the petition. She was thorough, and I knew she wouldn't have just accepted excuses. I stopped by her house one afternoon and found her porch light on at noon, a stack of unopened mail in her box, and 2 newspapers still damp from the last rain. Her neighbor, an older man with a walker and a sun hat, was watering azaleas next door. "You seen Marlene lately?" I asked. He looked up. "Not since that meeting, week before last I think, said she was heading out of town to see her niece. Did she say when she'd be back?" "No, just said she needed a break. Looked real tired." I nodded, thanked him, and headed back to my truck. Something about it didn't feel right. Marlene didn't vanish. She followed through. That was her nature. I called her phone that night, straight to voicemail. I sent an email, bounced back. I even dropped a letter in her mailbox. Nothing. 3 days later, I got a call from Deputy Hill. "You got a minute?" he asked. "Yeah." "What's going on?" "Need to ask you a few things about Marlene Peters. You've had contact with her recently?" "Last I saw her was at the board vote. She was sharp as ever." "Why?" "She was reported missing yesterday. Family hadn't heard from her in over a week." House was locked, car still in the garage, suitcase packed but untouched. A cold knot twisted in my gut. "You think it's connected to the HOA mess? I'm not ruling anything out," he said. "Not yet." That night I sat in the barn's loft, scanning through my trail cam system. I hadn't checked the archive in over a week. Nothing had happened until now. I hadn't had a reason. At exactly 2:36 in the morning, 4 days earlier, one of the outer cameras picked up motion near my southern fence line, just beyond the tree line. A single figure, hooded, flashlight off. They didn't try to approach the barn, just stood there, watching. For almost 7 minutes, I enhanced the footage, adjusted the contrast, and froze the key frame. Randy Oakley. I printed the image and brought it to the sheriff's office the next day. Hill didn't look surprised. He's denied any recent activity, claimed he's been in Tampa on business. Then who's been parking in front of his house every night around 11, I asked. Because I've seen the same black Dodge Ram outside his garage on my way into town all week. Hill's jaw tightened. You got footage of the truck? Yeah, license plates visible in 2 frames. That was enough to get the sheriff's department to issue a formal interview request, but what happened next pushed the whole situation into dangerous territory. The HOA's new treasurer, a woman named Dana Griggs, who'd replaced the one Cheryl had appointed, came forward with a flash drive. She walked into the sheriff's office and handed it over without saying a word. Inside were spreadsheets, payment logs, and scanned receipts. And one folder labeled Operations. It contained emails between Cheryl, Randy, and 2 former board members. They'd been siphoning HOA funds not just through bogus landscaping charges, but through shell companies. One of the companies, Sunrise Community Solutions, had billed the HOA for infrastructure consulting over the past year. Over $35,000. The company's mailing address, a P.O. box registered to Randy Oakley. But worse, buried in the email threads was a message from Randy to Cheryl, dated 2 weeks before Marlene disappeared. It read, "She's getting too close. The audit will expose everything. We need to take care of it before the next meeting." "I'll handle it." That was enough for the county prosecutor to authorize a search warrant. The raid on the Oakley's house happened 2 mornings later. I stood at the edge of my driveway sipping coffee as 2 unmarked vehicles and a marked cruiser rolled past. Word spread fast. By afternoon, the entire neighborhood knew. Inside their house, authorities found a hidden flash drive, more financial records, and most chilling of all, Marlene's missing cell phone, tucked into a shoebox in the back of a closet. The sheriff gave a press briefing the next day. Cheryl and Randy were taken into custody and charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and suspicion of unlawful detention. They hadn't harmed Marlene, luckily, but they had coerced her into silence. She was found at a motel 30 miles away, disoriented and frightened. According to her statement, Randy had shown up at her house pretending to deliver financial records. When she let him in, he threatened her, saying if she went public with what she found, she'd regret it. They took her phone and told her to disappear for a while. She escaped the motel after he left her with no transportation and no way to contact anyone. It was over. With Cheryl and Randy facing trial, the remaining HOA leadership resigned in disgrace. The township voted unanimously to revoke the HOA's charter, a rare move, but not illegal when mismanagement and criminal behavior were proven. The neighborhood would now be governed directly under township ordinances, with community decisions made through open resident votes. The barn became more than just a building. It became a symbol. I hosted a spring fair that month, free eggs, live music, kids painting planter boxes. Marlene arrived, thinner and quieter than before, but smiling. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. Later, as the sun dipped behind the treetops, I sat with her on a bench near the pasture. "You saved this place," I told her. She shook her head. "We all did. You just built the barn that gave us a reason to stand up." I watched the chickens peck at the grass, the breeze rustling the tall grass along the fence line. This land's always been stubborn, I said. Guess I just take after it. She laughed softly. Good. We need more stubborn people. And as the stars came out and the sound of laughter drifted from the barn, I realized something. I hadn't just defended my land. I'd helped free a neighborhood. By early summer, the barn was fully wired, the chickens had a proper roost, and the field behind it had been tilled and seeded for heirloom squash and dent corn. I'd even added a small greenhouse on the southern edge, using old window panes I'd salvaged from an estate sale in town. The place was thriving, and not just in the agricultural sense. Neighbors wandered by more often, some bringing pies or coffee, others just staying to chat as they helped weed a row or mend a fence. But underneath the calm, something still festered. The trial date for Cheryl and Randy had been set for late July. They were out on bail, confined to their home, though that hadn't stopped a few of their old allies from making quiet rounds with thinly veiled warnings. One evening, a man named Daryl, former HOA board secretary, stood across the street from my property with his arms crossed, not saying a word, just watching. I didn't acknowledge him. He left after a few minutes, but his intent was clear. They wanted to regain control. Or at least make sure nobody dug deeper. That was their mistake. Because I had. A week earlier, while cleaning out an old cabinet in the barn's loft, I'd found something tucked behind a loose plank and envelope dated 1993, addressed to my uncle who'd owned the land before me. Inside were 5 sheets of paper. An offer from a development firm called Kinlock Properties to buy the entire property for a suspiciously low price. A handwritten response from my uncle declining the offer, and a typed letter from a legal firm threatening forced easement claims if he didn't reconsider. I had never heard of Kinlock before, but after some digging at the county archives, I uncovered something disturbing. Kinlock had gone defunct in 1996, but not before merging with another firm, Sterling Horizon Developments, the same company that had built Heritage Woods. The very subdivision Cheryl and her cronies lived in. That explained a lot. The HOA hadn't just been run by power-hungry busybodies, they'd been sitting on a legacy of shady land acquisition tactics. My land had been a target long before I ever drove a nail into that first beam. They tried to get it cheap. When that failed, they tried to annex it through regulation, and when that failed, they tried to bury me in bureaucracy until the whole thing unraveled. But one thing still didn't add up. The HOA's original charter, filed in 1998, included a clause that claimed voluntary inclusion of adjacent parcels with a list of lot numbers. Mine was listed. That seemed impossible. My uncle had never signed anything, and the deed had never changed hands, so I requested the official record. When the file arrived from the township office, I spread the forms across my kitchen table. Each page bore the same notary stamp. Same date, same signature, including one document that claimed to be my uncle's affidavit consenting to HOA jurisdiction. The signature was a forgery. The handwriting was close but not enough. I pulled out one of my uncle's old letters for comparison. The R in Rourke was the giveaway. His always looped counterclockwise. The one in the affidavit curled the other way. I sent it to the county prosecutor's office. Within 3 days, they opened a formal investigation into document fraud and property record tampering. Deputy Hill called me personally. "Forgery's no small charge," he said. "If that affidavit's fake and they used it to justify decades of jurisdiction over your land, this could blow open a whole new case." "Who would have filed it?" I asked. He paused. "We're working on that, but the notary listed on the documents she's been dead since 2004. Her stamp was supposed to be destroyed." I didn't say anything for a moment. They used a dead woman's seal. Looks like it. That's when everything shifted again. The state attorney general's office got involved. They subpoenaed HOA financials going back 20 years, not just for Heritage Woods, but for 2 other subdivisions built by Sterling Horizon in the county. It turned out this wasn't an isolated scheme. Several properties had similar affidavits conveniently signed under duress. Or in some cases, not at all. By August, Cheryl and Randy weren't just facing charges of conspiracy and fraud, they were now linked to historical real estate racketeering. The statute of limitations hadn't run out on all of it, especially where false filings and active use of forged documents were concerned. Marlene returned to the forefront, this time as a key witness. Her discovery of financial irregularities had started a chain reaction that exposed a web of falsified records, sham companies, and coercive tactics used to pressure landowners into compliance or sellouts. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Local news stations had picked up the story, and a few regional outlets sent reporters when the civil suit was announced. Yes, civil because I wasn't done either. With the state pursuing criminal charges, I filed a civil suit against the HOA, Cheryl, Randy, and Sterling Horizon for damages, legal fees, and attempted theft of land through fraud. My attorney, a wiry man named Glenn who wore bolo ties and had a voice like gravel in a tin can, laid it out in his opening statement. This isn't just about a barn. This is about 25 years of deceit, manipulation, and targeted harassment. My client's family legacy was nearly erased so someone else could profit from it. The court listened. And when we presented the original 1889 deed, followed by the forged affidavit, there wasn't a sound in the room beyond the shuffling of papers and the occasional cough. The defense tried to argue that any irregularities were clerical errors. But Glenn brought in a handwriting expert, a forensic notary analyst, and a retired attorney who'd once worked on the county's land review board. Together, they dismantled the defense's claims like termites through pine. The verdict came after only 2 days of deliberation. The court found in my favor on all counts. The HOA was ordered to pay restitution and legal costs. Cheryl and Randy's personal assets were to be seized to cover their portion. Sterling Horizon, now operating under a different name but still active, was fined heavily by the state for systemic fraud and ordered to release all properties wrongfully included in HOA jurisdictions. But beyond the legal victory, what happened next was the real closure. Marlene was elected to the Township Council in the fall. She ran unopposed. The barn was added to the county's preservation list not just for its architecture, but for its role in exposing the largest HOA corruption case in state history, and the subdivision formerly known as Heritage Woods. It was dissolved. The residents voted to form a cooperative neighborhood council, instead voluntary, transparent, and elected annually. Their first act was to rename their streets after native trees and plants, removing the last traces of the HOA's manufactured identity. One afternoon, as I trimmed the edges of the new greenhouse beds, a boy from 3 streets over wandered up with a notebook in hand. "Are you the guy with the old property?" he asked. "I suppose I am," he nodded. "We're doing a school project on local history." "My teacher said you helped save the town." I didn't know what to say to that. "I just built a barn," I said after a moment. He squinted at it. "It's a really good barn." That night, I stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the fireflies wink in the grass along the tree line. The chickens had all gone quiet. The wind rolled softly through the corn, and the stars blinked through a clear sky that hadn't seen smog or smoke in generations. No more trespass notices. No more forged documents. No more board meetings where someone decided what was best for me, just land. And peace. And a barn that stood as proof that sometimes all it takes to bring a crooked empire down is a hammer, a deed, and a refusal to back down.